Week 7 is an exploration of institutional racism within migration, gender, and waged work with Laura Lamb.
Start off a little bit about migration, race, ethnicity, and precarious work, which is something that I've been really I've been studying a lot, and also a lot of personal experience. And and thank you so much for. I saw some of the answers that came in regarding the question I asked, which I will. Don't worry if you didn't submit it. Totally okay, because we'll go over it shortly after. Why migration is important. I actually just want to know if you are comfortable sharing. How many of you were not born in Canada? Because I'm not either. Okay. Okay, so like most of the room. Sorry? Almost the whole, exactly. Like 20, so in Canada, like 20% of the population are migrants. And I moved here when I was 4 with my family, and I remember lots of struggles that my father went through, and I think it really informed what I wanted to do with my education and my career in the future. But one interesting story I want to just share before we start is I think race and migration often, they are different things, but they sometimes can be tied in together. I have 2 really great Brazilian friends that moved. I'm originally from Vancouver. So, but the year before I moved to Toronto for my master's, they were telling me, they're like, Laura, I'm so excited. I want to tell you, we finally met Canadians. And I was really curious because I've met them for a year and I wasn't sure what they were talking about. And they said, we went on a skiing trip up north in BC. And I was like, tell me more, what do you mean? And then, so I'm in central Vancouver, just to give you a perspective. It's quite diverse, there's a lot of migrants. Close. Yeah, good here. Thank you. But interestingly enough, I kept asking, so what do you mean by you finally met Canadians? I thought you've been in Canada for like 2 years now, or a year or 2. They said, oh, we met white people. And then so interestingly enough, they never saw me as Canadian, even though I've been friends with them since they arrived. So it didn't offend me at all. I just thought it was very interesting how people view what is a Canadian? Who is a Canadian? Does it matter who is a Canadian at this point? So anyways, all to share, I don't know if any, I just always found that interesting story in my mind in terms of understanding who am I, and also what does it matter in our lives. So I want to now move on to the question I asked some of you when Kayla sent out the pre-reading materials. I want to tie it into a little bit about labor as well. What is a story or image that comes to mind when you think about the topic of immigrants and work in Toronto or in your community here in Regent Park? I think for today, I also want to make sure, I also want to learn from you all. So please share your stories or experiences. Challenge me if you think this is not what I see in the community. So absolutely, I would love to have a conversation with you all. We'll come back to this. This question might come up again, but for our conversation to keep going, I just want to break down today what our conversation's about. I know you can see, I want to share a little bit background about Canada's immigration system. I think looking back and knowing the history of Canada and also the racist practices that have come along with it, it's very important to acknowledge. And then I want to move a little about gig work, which is how I've kind of got my entry into understanding. I'll talk a little bit more about my research. For a couple of years, I've been working with ride-hailing immigrants, ride-hail drivers and couriers, and I've been making conversations with them and interviewing them in the last 4 years or so. So I'll share a little bit about that experience and what I've got the privilege to learn from my participants. And lastly, some conversation about policy and what we can do about it here. Because these are big issues. Migration, we can't solve it immediately here, but I think there's something we can do at a micro level here with our community, for sure. So today I just had a couple objectives. So learning how immigration and race is an undercurrent in our society, in our city today. A little bit about labor and immigration, how the two are intertwined in some ways, and also some policy implications. I also want to open the floor up. Is there anything else you would like me to, address or answer? Please let me know. You can raise your hand now, or if you want to keep that in mind at any point, jump in and say hey, can you touch upon this topic? We can totally do that. Yeah. So we'll talk about that as well for sure. And I hope I can answer your question. If I'm not the right person to answer, I can definitely I'll follow up. That's why I won't claim to be an expert in anything, but I can definitely follow up and do some research. Okay, sounds good. So just a quick background. I hate tables, but this is important for us to showcase. It's small, but I also can share slides in the future, right? Okay. Canada. I want to start off with this because initially we had to start off with how did Canada come to be is through a lot of taking land from Indigenous people, but also from the fact that it was the objective back in the day was to settle the land, whatever that meant. From when the French Canadians set up in Upper Canada. I'm not going to go through the history lesson. I just really want to showcase that this hasn't been like a step-by-step process. And in the last box here, the 1986 to present, this is where the most changes to the immigration has happened. So before, Canada actually selected immigrants based on race. So Europeans were selected into Canada. That was basically the policy, outright racial preferences. In 1969, there is policy on the there's an immigration act, and then the more prime ministers decided to embrace multiculturalism. So this is where we are seeing this system of Canada being being praised as one of these best immigration systems because they started to become points-based system where there's a metric that you can come into Canada through. My parents came through the economic system where they had to prove that they can speak the language, etc. My parents didn't have a high university degree. I remember them telling me that. They were like, we don't know if we can get in. But you had to almost play a game of getting these points. And I know a lot of people share these experiences. And I also want to share a little bit afterwards in a couple of slides how this is flawed in some ways, and also what can we do in the future as well to address some of these problems. These, again, big issues. I don't know if we can fix all of them, but just to give you context on how historically this was a nation-building exercise for Canada. But before I actually want to go into the 1986 onwards, what happened there, I also want to address our Indigenous relations and immigration. These are two things that are typically not ever talked about. I did my master's education at TMU in immigration studies, and one of the first class I remember my professor asking was have you ever had an Indigenous person tell you whether they want immigrants allowed on the land or not? That was a very provocative question, but it really got me thinking. If we say that we are a land that, we want to decolonize the land, we want to give land back, we really respect Indigenous relations, why do they not have a say on who comes into the country? So I think that was a very interesting thought to me. Again, I want to walk you through this exercise of how do we think about these big issues and how they're all interconnected. Because if we talk about decolonization, but we don't talk about immigration, that's also something interesting that we don't really do. I want to share a quote. This is from a paper. I'll try to make it less, but I just want to read out this quote here. From two professors. They talked about people of color are settlers who live on land that is appropriated and contested, where Aboriginal peoples are denied nationhood and access to their own land. This was actually a very controversial quote. And today I actually am showing you both sides of the story. I'm not trying to tell you one side or the other because I'm going to show you the other argument. So these two authors are arguing that because I'm a settler, are they saying as an immigrant, Laura came here when she was 4, she's a settler too. She actually is, what is she doing here? And also talking about how there are communities that I might be displacing when my family moved into my home in Vancouver. Are we just taking a land from Indigenous or Aboriginal people? So I really thought that was a very interesting argument that they brought up. However, at the same time, two authors, on the other hand, Sharma and Wright, they challenged that thought because they challenged that the conflation between migration and colonialism should not be talked together because so many people with a history of colonialism are forced to migrate. We can think about what's happening in our world today. If you face a colonialism, you are forced to move. So these two authors are challenging that modern colonialization, largely depending on the global mobilization of the newly expropriated and soon-to-be exploited proletarians. It's a very challenging, big quote here, but I want to bring that up because you can see both sides. I sometimes now do think that, oh, am I a settler here? And sometimes it does help me think in terms of what can I do to actually be part of the decolonization process? If I really want to commit to it, what can I do? At the same time, also challenging that a lot of people are displaced. Many refugees, many people in Canada to this day are forced to migrate, and they should not be having to be appropriated or equated to this colonial project as well. I'm going to start there. I know this is kind of big themes, but I just want to start off with that today. Why do you think that this might be important to think about? Or have you ever thought about this already in your own world? Moving on here, I want to show, this is a quote from the Ontario's Expert Roundtable on Immigration 2012. Canada was built on natural resources, is future will be built on human resources. And why I think this was a very kind of chilling quote to me was thinking about, this is where I want to move us towards our conversation today. How has labor become Canada's immigration system? And when that first question I posed to you earlier today, the tie-in between immigration and work is more intricate than you think. And I think a lot of times when you hear this quote here, you would really think about who are the migrants that are being brought, selected in, and what kind of roles and demands are they filling into the gap that Canada so needs. This is just to set up what I actually, part of my research, and you can, there's obviously a lot of conversation today and we can talk about, is that there is this notion of two-step migration. And what I mean by that, and I'll show it a little bit more afterwards, is this, the second bullet point here is, since the 1960s, 70s, 80s, it has been a fundamental transformation of our immigration system to provide human resources as the fuel for our immigration system and for the economy, all in the name of the economy. And there was this article I also posted as a pre-reading, was talking about how all the conversation around immigration has been, what can you provide for Canada? And it's never the other, and it's very, very one-sided. It's almost like you are lucky to come here, so now start working and make us and increase the GDP, etc. Fill our demands, fill the care worker needs that we have, or fill the truck driving industry, whatever it is, fill the Tim Hortons, we need people. I think that has become the narrative that Canada has used in trying to build nations, and also at the same time making it temporary, that all these people you're not even granted permanent residency. You might be allowed, if you work long enough, then you can settle here. But a lot of increase in the policy has been on this two-step migration, which I'll go over shortly. What I mean by that is, in essence, that you are going to be temporary until you're allowed to become permanent at one point. And this process can take many, many years. This is just some articles. Even when I was just doing some research the last couple of weeks on this, it's like we are seeing international students they come here, pay 3 times the rate as a domestic student, and some of you may know people or yourself have been an international student. And this is continuously increasing in Canada. There's no limit to temporary permits that Canada can issue, but there is limits to permanent levels of immigration. However, for temporary, they were like, we don't care. We can just issue as many temporary work permits as we want. And there's also a lot of things that come in hand. I don't know if a couple of you might know, in the last couple of months, there has been arguments like housing crisis has been blamed on immigration, for example. And you can think about I would like to hear your thoughts on it, or you may have but I just think these are interesting conflation of big policy ideas that are now grouped and lumped into migration. And who ends up suffering a lot of times are precarious migrants who A, don't have status in Canada, and B, they can't even afford a lot of living expenses in this country. So Another thing to look here at, I know I'm a huge nerd, so I love the graphs and everything, but if you don't need to, you can just, I just want to showcase this little spike here. All I want to really showcase for you is that in Canada, you are seeing increasing number of people who are on these two-step migration programs where they have to have been in the country at one point, and then they're allowed to stay. So what we're seeing is that, for example, a lot of times the argument from the government of Canada saying if you have work experience, you will do better in the future years. There's a lot of researchers on that. However, we don't talk about, but what happens in those years before you become permanent, before you can actually have a PR card, etc., or become a citizen. These are years that they don't really are taken into consideration. So I think it's important for us to talk about this as well. I want to show, because I know we're running, we actually just talked about this. I know there's a lot of text here, so I'm not going to go over this, but because I know a lot of you already have immigration backgrounds here, I don't need to go over this. But why I was talking a little bit more about temporary is this category here. So a lot of people come through the permanent residency, which is you were talking about landed immigrants. So I have it here, an individual who has been granted permanent residence, they have landed immigrant status. They're allowed to stay in Canada. However, people who are increasingly on temporary residence, temporary permits, these are people who are not guaranteed that they can stay in Canada. They have a permit, but you just have to keep renewing it perhaps, or you can, some of them are renew it for, so in my research, we've been seeing that on average, a person would have increasing their number of days is over 600 days on a permit. So length of time on a permit makes a difference. And why I'm saying that is when you were talking about earlier, it's just a lot of bureaucracy as well. And there's a recent term that I read that I kind of love because it really described it very well as bureaucratic violence on migrants. You're constantly asked to do administrative work, constantly filing paperwork after paperwork to prove that you can stay in the country or you can work in the country. So we don't need to talk about the technicalities today, but I just want to focus on that. It's like, how can these not invisible, they are very visible barriers are affecting one's well-being. So I want to lead this into the jobs that migrants take. So a lot of the times, a lot of research says that a lot of migrants come, they are underemployed, they can't find jobs in their own field, they have to take something lower in order to, because of the lack, I hate this word, Canadian experience, we can all, I will quote it because it's not a real thing. I can go on a rant for you to talk about this, but so what ended happening is a lot of migrants are more likely to end up in precarious, non-standard work. And I'll also explain what I mean by non-standard work because this is really important in the context of gig work, which I will share a little bit more afterwards. Some research even has shown that even if you have pre-landing Canadian experience, it does not eliminate the disparities in wages when it comes to comparable native-born, so Canadian-born citizens. All that means is to say, you are, as a migrant, when you come to Canada, you're already worse off, and your end-up trajectory will still probably be less well off than a Canadian citizen, which is very unfortunate due to discrimination, due to underemployment, unemployment. And I know this is very frustrating to hear. I have friends, I have family that live through this, but I think there is something we can do. And I think at this point, the policymakers are recognizing these are untapped talent. This is an unused skill force, and they should be recognizing it. And I would love for us to have this conversations like, what can we do to push and to help those people? Because there are psychological effects. When you are a trained doctor, engineer, and you're like, I can't find work in my field because of these credentialing issues, this has a toll on your settlement experience and for you to find just joy in your life. So I always find that work and migration also can have a huge effect on how one perceives their life, basically. And this is the next section where I want to move a little bit into is, what is the gig economy? And how many of you have heard this term before, gig economy? One? Gig economy, gig work, anything like that? Sorry?
Is it like sideline?
Part-time jobs, yep, yep. Freelancing, yes, you got the right term, exactly. So a lot of gig work is these short-term contracts that one would take on in order to, because they can't find full-time jobs, then no, don't worry, it becomes very much whatever I can take. And a lot of migrants end up in gig work. They're very much more likely to be in it. And there's different types of gig work. I'll actually talk a little bit more about that later. But before we go, I want to share this is a documentary my colleagues and I did 2 years ago, and I want to share the story with you to really give you a better idea of the migration, gig work, precarious work story.
For the most of my life, I have felt instability. I'm Syrian and I spent most of my life outside of my country. I immigrated with a big dream and I hope I can achieve this dream in here. When I first immigrated to Canada, I was a bit lost of what could I do, how could I start my work life. I have a bachelor degree in civil engineering. I was graduated with an honor, but it was very hard for me as a newcomer to find opportunities. Although I have more than 2 years international experience, I had a couple of friends who advised me to start working as a gig worker, as it's a very good opportunity for me as an immigrant. So I deliver food and grocery through different platforms. It was good until the COVID happened. Due to COVID-19, I was impacted in a continuous delay on my work permit and permanent resident. And this is controlling all aspects of my life. I don't have an access to healthcare due to this immigration delays. I just was too scared that I would contract COVID and I would give it back to my family when I go home. And that was very hard for me. But I talked to some family members. I had support. I was like, I need to make myself stronger because if I didn't go through this pandemic, then I'm not strong enough as I thought I am. During the lockdowns, many people have stayed at home and we worked really hard to deliver essential to their home. It was really good feeling that I'm helping the country to do something about the crisis we are in, so that we can stop the spread of COVID-19. Gig workers are really suffering day by day, and it's becoming harder day by day. I feel that we are so much underestimated. No one cares about us, so that's the reason we have the power and energy, and we are angry. We need to get our rights. We don't have paid sick days. We don't have health insurance. We don't have anything. And sometimes our wages are less than a minimum wage. Especially during the pandemic, a lot of delivery platforms have cut our wages, although we're working as an essential workers. And we are sacrificing our lives to deliver essential for people. So I try to help in whatever way I can to encourage gig workers to talk about their problems, to find a way so we can fix the problem or to do anything to help these couriers. And I also helped in building the data structure in the Gig Workers United. We're trying our best, and I believe we can reach somewhere by the continuous fight. I felt that I need to do something. I need to support my community, especially during the pandemic. I volunteered to deliver over 200 food boxes weekly to farmers all over Ontario. I also volunteered to deliver planting equipment to children, to spread the happiness between children, because kids nowadays, they were affected in so many ways. I have learned how much it's important for the community to collaborate together to survive this pandemic. Loneliness is really hard, and socializing is important for us to stay strong and to keep going. Without the community, I would have been lost. I wouldn't know what's the best place to do something or get something. So I feel like getting involved in the community for immigrants is the most important thing for us to do. In Canada, I can be the person I always dreamed of being. There are so many opportunities for me to grow and learn. Whatever my nationality or my religion or my color is, I feel welcomed. This has given me a big power to work and be a person who always serve the community and help to be a better person for this country.
So Dee was a gig worker, and specifically on a platform, a gig work food delivery platform that I've got an opportunity to meet. And her story is very similar to many that you'll see. And I think when I talk about gig workers, obviously there's many types of gig workers, a form of employment like contracting, freelancing, but the specific types of gig workers that I want to focus on today, a lot of them are the more precarious ones, who are the ones that Dee mentioned, no benefits. You know, you come in and you work on the app whenever you want, but you're controlled essentially by this app telling you where to go with less than minimum wage at times, because they can change the wage on you at any point. I want to talk a little bit more about these platform workers that I have the opportunity to talk to. It's similar to the stories that Dee has said, but I want to illustrate a few more things. Here's a quote from Ali, who another participant I got to talk to. He's talking about riding his bike and delivering food. There's nobody to protect you or help you. There are no health benefits at all. They don't see you like other industries. They call you a freelancer or contractor, or you don't have any rights as an employee. Because when you work for one of these apps, you are not considered an employee of the app. You are considered a freelancer. You do everything's on your own. So if you fall down, have injury, that's on your own. So So I met this is 2 years ago when I met Ali. He messaged me one day. He's like, I just got hit by a car on Bloor, and he couldn't work for a month afterwards, and he didn't get paid for a month afterwards while he was delivering food. A driver didn't see him on Bloor. So it's very precarious lives that gig workers are doing, and why it's important for us to talk about a little bit more about it. And again, I'm using gig work platform workers only as an example. There are a lot of other industries like this, but I'm just showing you one little example here. This is another testament to the story about people don't recognizing our credentials. This participant was telling me that I knew nobody would take me as a senior staff because first, I don't have the Canadian experience yet. This was Moran was a Syrian refugee who came here and was a salesperson who traveled around the Middle East doing sales. So when he came here, this is what he was talking about. I didn't expect to be a senior staff because I don't have Canadian experience. So I said, okay, no problem. Just let me put my feet in the business, in the work. I will improve myself. I also thought that to get a better opportunity, I have to study in Canada. So I went to college. But there's no hope for me to get a new job or to be better because the system just keeps on crushing him every single time. At one point when I was interviewing him, he was driving Uber, and he said it's still the better job than working at, I think he was working at Lowe's at that point, like the store. And he said, I just want to prove myself and do something, but I'm still not given the opportunity. So the last one here I want to show here is this is Ira, another platform worker from India that I met. It seems easy that the ads for Skip the Dishes or Uber Eats, a really cool ad saying you can work on your own hours, which is true. Everything is true, but it does not really show the real struggle. So again, going back to why this is important is that we see one face of it, that this is very flexible work. And I think the media showcases that as well, saying this is what you can make side money. This is really good for you. But does it really showcase the downside and the barriers behind it? I just want to challenge us to think about it when we do talk to a gig worker, when we see someone on the streets delivering food, just really think about their experiences as well. I'll give it a short break and just give me until the 7-Eleven, 4 more minutes. I want to talk about, this is going to get a little bit technical, just bear with me. And I want to talk about 4 different terms here. There will be a 4th one. So standard work, non-standard work, what I mean by that. And also what I mean by precarious work and also decent work, which is the other opposite end. Why this is important is for us to think about in the context of labor, what kind of jobs are people slotting into? So this is the graph that I wanted to show you. Standard, non-standard work, standard work, precarious work, decent work. And I'm going to now focus a little bit on the top part. So non-standard work is any job that is lacking any one of the forms of standard work, which includes a fixed schedule, a place of business, you're under the employer's control, and it's continued. So if you think about standard work as these qualifications, I remember when my dad first came to Canada, he found, even though it was low paying, he found a standard work. He found an employer, it was continuous, he was on a contract, and he had a place to work. What I'm trying to show is a lot of people now coming to Canada are not finding standard work. They end up in non-standard work here is when they miss any one of these characteristics, and they're on contract basis, and they're also doing something in additional to their income, because one job is now not enough. And I know a lot of people just say, I just wish I could do one job and that would be great. But we're no longer doing that. I'm not a standard worker. I work a couple of jobs in order to make my ends meet as well. So I think this is just to showcase the precarity and the job situations that some of us are in, and how migrants find themselves in some of these areas. And the last definition I'll give before our break here is what I mean by precarious work and also what decent work I want to showcase. Precarious work comes with a lot of employment insecurity. So that could mean contractual contract insecurity. It's temporary. You are underemployed and you're in multiple jobs and sectors. This is what I mean by employment insecurity. There's also income inadequacy. So you're not making enough, therefore you're doing more of these jobs in order to make ends meet. And lack of rights and protection. So lack of unionization is one huge one. Lack of social security or workplace benefits or any regulatory support. And on the other end of the spectrum is what I would say, I am not 100% happy with this definition about decent work, because I don't know if that's actually the end of the spectrum, but if you want to go with this definition, is opportunities for work that is productive, it delivers a fair income, security in a workplace, and social protection of the family. So I'll just read that short definition for decent work. And what I want to come away with this table, these 2 tables together, or these 2 grids, whatever you want to call them, is that we could see these work categories as a spectrum. Not one is going to be slotted one or the other, but perhaps we can think about who falls on what end of the spectrum and where are they leaning more towards. So if there's anything I could impart with you with this graph here and the slide here, it's really challenging us to think, where do migrants fit in here? Where do our own lives, where do we fit in the spectrum of precarious work, decent work, non-standard, standard work, and how do we feel about it? And also where the opportunities are if we want to move. Can we get out of it if we want to, or do we want to stay in? So with that, I'll give a short break. Do you have any questions before we have a little break? I know. It's been a long time that you're sitting here. So the last half, well, not last half, we'll end this last third here. Policy, which is what I think we all wanted to address. And this is more a conversation. I would love to hear your ideas. But how I want to approach this last section here is after everything we were talking about today. So starting from the background of Indigenous and immigration relations, how Canada's immigration system works, to precarious labor, where we are now at. I want to end off with some questions that I am curious about. So I'm going to pose them as questions instead of telling you anything about policy. I was just telling Kayla earlier, as a researcher, I often feel like I'm only immersed in the problems and I don't get to think about solutions. So I would love to turn to you all to get some inspiration for solutions. So questions I'm curious about. How have we addressed the systemic and systematic issues in our economy to talk about who is being recruited in to fill in the demand of our labor? So what I mean by that is I'm going to give an example of that, and then that can hopefully instill some more ideas in you. Again, a little bit more slide text. Don't need to read everything. My current dissertation is working with care workers. I work with PSWs. I know I heard words about a lot of you here that are in care work. I would love to talk to you afterwards. Why this has stemmed from my previous research on gig workers is that I find a lot of care workers also becoming gig workers. And this is an interesting phenomenon as our health care is in crisis. There's a lot of need for care. I was very curious, why are such high demand professionals still finding themselves in very precarious gig work settings where they can't either find a good full-time paying job, or some of them tell me they can't find a full-time paying job. So all to say is, in the pandemic, there's, I don't know if you could those on the other end here, there was a reporter on the Toronto Star saying, long-term care homes needed staff during COVID, so they turned to gig workers inside the Uberization of healthcare. That term scared me so much to the point, like now I'm doing my dissertation on it, because I'm thinking about why is there an Uberization needed for care? So as here, care work, there's a shortage experience in Canada and also globally. Immigrants make up 36% of Canada's care occupations in PSWs, so such as nurse aides, orderly, patient service associates. These are the categories from Statistics Canada that has been shown. So personal support workers, or PSWs, fall under this category as well. These jobs typically are met with precarious working conditions, such as no paid time off, no benefits. I'm not saying all the jobs are like that. If you find an employer that's great, that's good. But I've been interviewing some care workers that do not have this benefit and this privilege. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, leading to my first question here that I asked earlier, what are the issues in our economy that has talked about who is being recruited in to fill the demand? So we talked about earlier about immigrants who can't find work, like a civil engineer, who become a gig worker. Now we have people, who are the people now filling in our healthcare demands? What, and have we addressed the issues that, why first of all, are they in the position that they should be in or not? Or can they get out if they want to? It's just basically going through these last 3 points that I have about the either or mindset. So I think a lot of times when we talk about choosing, do migrants have to choose precarious work, or like either this or this, either flexible with Uber, or you will have no job at all. I think these are the arguments that I want to challenge us to think about, that it doesn't necessarily have to be either or, and it's an illusion that it has to be either or, because there are absolutely opportunities where employers or advocacy group or organizations can say, no, you are not, we don't need to offer only you minimum wage, and in order to say like this is a job, or take it or leave it. There are also other opportunities that exist. So I know it sounds far-fetched, but it really has challenged my own thinking. When I hear narratives of companies, I met the policymaker at Uber 2 years ago, and she was like, well, if we want to give rights to Uber drivers, they won't have flexibility. And I remember someone saying, that's not true. You can also give them flexibility and give them benefits at the same time. Why do you just control yourself to say that? So I just using that as an example of a story I've heard. But anyways, leaving it up there. So please take that into your percolations when you're thinking about it. this one was basically kind of what I was talking about earlier about gig work, and when technology comes into play, I think we also have to challenge who are the people controlling technology at the back end, because it's not necessarily just an app. People are the ones creating those algorithms behind an app. So again, challenge you to think about it. I don't have an answer, I'm just asking questions here. The last one is, who hears gig workers? Or let's change that word to precarious workers. Who hears migrants? Who hears precarious migrant workers? I think a lot of times we don't. This is a committee that happened, I think, in 2022 or 2021. Sorry, 2021. Ontario had a workforce advisory for the future of work. They had no workers on the board, on the committee. So I just want to challenge the irony at times when we say we want to fight for worker rights, we want to fight for all these things. Who are the people that are at the center of it, and are we hearing the voices? And if we're not, can we challenge our policymakers, our MPs, everyone around here is like, why do you not have a single gig worker in this group of workers that you have to discuss? So, anyways, that is all. This is the last question that I had. Like, if you had a policy idea, we can now, we have 10 minutes. I would maybe just leave it at that. So some of the policy ideas from my end is actually thinking about even like targeted basic incomes. Like, can we talk about these conversations around, as the government's talking about basic income, these sort of big ideas about how can we provide some form of training or some form of money that migrants, when they come here, again, these are big, far-fetched ideas that are not being experimented on, tried out yet, but I just want to put these ideas out there. There are things that are kind of happening in the mix right now to say, if we can give migrants a little bit of money to start, we can help them set training, get education, whatever it might be, what would the outcomes be? There are things in the works on upskilling and training programs. Like, if you were a nurse or whatever, if nurse, can there be a faster pathway to credentialing? So those are things that are happening, as well as don't forget the employer side of things as well. I think it's also for us to educate employers to know the benefits and the talent that migrants bring to the workplace, and also to actually work with their HR policies to be like, no, this is actually discrimination. This is actually our systemic racial biases that we have on people. And also to recognize these, I think, is a very important step that seems easy, but a lot of employers actually don't do that. And I've seen that firsthand as well. If you want to reach me, my email's there. I'm happy to stick around. But thank you so much for all your feedback and your questions and your stories. I really feel privileged to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.